Update the board on the budget. This item provides an opportunity for the board's information and discussion.
Here she is. We're always glad to see you, you know that.
Thank you. Good to be here. Good evening, President Logan, Superintendent Thompson, Vice President Hedrick, and members of the board. Tonight, we'll update the board on where we're at in our fiscal year 21 budget development. And we'd like to start by looking at state collection revenue data. And the importance of looking at how the state's doing with tax collections. As the board would recall, 73% of our budget is based on state aid. So as the state budget goes, so therefore school budgets go. So it is important that we monitor how the state is doing, and we make sure that we will hopefully receive all the dollars that we have been allocated for this fiscal year. And so through February 28th, if you look at the middle column, which is in green, those are the state revenues through the end of February, and they are sitting at just a little bit over $4.7 billion. That's almost a 4% increase from their estimates, and up almost 8% from this same time last year. So that is good news for the state. Certainly there are a number of financial indicators that we are watching, certainly with the virus concerns and other items that are impacting financial markets. We are keeping a close eye on all of those things, but as far as the state's ability to make its payments through the end of the fiscal year, it looks good. We are looking at also how much they've collected in their delinquency, which is actually a big part of why their revenues are up. They've collected almost 17% in delinquent taxes, which is good for the state. So that brings us to our own revenue estimates. I presented this chart to the board at our last budget presentation. These were kind of our early revenue estimates in kind of general broad terms. So we wanted to kind of break that down just a little bit more for you tonight. So we'll look at this next chart, which there's a lot of data on here, but this is looking at our audited enrollment change by level for fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20. And if you recall, once we receive these audited enrollment numbers, that is potentially the base aid determination factor for either the next year or the following year, depending on which is higher. So now that these numbers are locked, we can really forecast out pretty closely what we think we're going to have in the next few fiscal years. So if looking at this chart, and obviously you can spend some time with it if you want to look at it particularly by level, but I kind of group them on the right side by elementary, middle, and high. And this is where our data, for the most part, does align with RSP data. You can see the enrollment decrease in elementary down over 3% between fiscal year 19 and 20. And then you can see that we are still up in the middle school at 2.5%. And then we're actually showing, from a revenue perspective, almost flat in high school. Some of that is related to attendance issues, going back to our earlier conversations, that chronic absenteeism is a problem not only academically but financially as well. With some of the attendance on the count date, you can really see that in high school. So overall, our audited FTE between fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20 dropped 584 FTE, or a 1.24% drop. And as we apply that to our base aid, we look at fiscal year 20 audited general fund, and we forecasted out fiscal year 21, 22, and 23 using the same weighting amounts. So this first assumption is there would be no change in weighting for those 3 following fiscal years. And that's kind of where we made those first budget estimates, the one in that overall chart. That's where these numbers came from. So you can see we're pretty close to what we shared with the board last month, at little over $10 million in fiscal year 21, $8.8 million in fiscal year 22, and $9.5 million in fiscal year 23. However, when we looked at the weightings and we looked at their historical drops over the past few years, we decided we needed to refine those revenue forecasts and drop our weighting estimates in certain weightings down by at least 1%. And I haven't forecasted special ed because it has been up and down these past few years, remembering that special ed is kind of a statewide budget, so it depends on how many instructors and paras are in special ed throughout the entire state. That determines how much reimbursement we get per position. So as more people are hired in special ed, the lower the amount of reimbursement per teacher. So that number, we don't even get a final for this fiscal year until May. So it's very hard to forecast special ed. So for this purpose, I've kind of left it flat. I also left flat the 4-year-old at-risk estimates, even though those have been somewhat dropping these last few years. Don't know if we've reached a floor yet on pre-K, but since that wasn't part of the RSP data, we left that alone. So we basically took down all the other weightings by 1%, and you can really see the impact of a weighting decrease on how much money we are forecasting for the next 3 years. And I'll go back to the previous slide. For fiscal year 21, before that weighting adjustment, we were estimating $10.5 million. With the weighting adjustment, that's now down to $9.3 million in new funding coming our way. Same with fiscal year 22. We had, without any weighting adjustment, we were estimating close to $9 million, but with a weighting estimate adjustment, we are estimating $7.6 million. So on top of the decline in enrollment, and again, fiscal year 20, 21, and 22, we know what that audited base is going to be. Those numbers will not change. Fiscal year 23 is still, whether we use a fiscal year 22 number or fiscal year 21, we'll have to wait and see what that final enrollment number is. But those other years are solid. So our estimates are going to be pretty close, assuming that 1% weighting decrease. So we kind of know where we're going to be revenue-wise, so that brings us to kind of where are we going to be from a fixed cost perspective. Here's where we're estimating fiscal year 21 fixed cost increases, and these are the common areas that we talk about every year. Utilities, we anticipate a $500,000 increase in all the utility lines. Fuel, right now, we're estimating an increase, even though oil is actually kind of tanking, if you will, but we consider that to be a short-term issue related to concerns in the markets that will probably bounce up. So again, remembering we're budgeting for all of fiscal year 21 through June, we are still anticipating about a $200,000 fuel adjustment. We'll know more here in the next few months. These revenue expenditure estimates we will continue to tweak. Transportation, that's a solid number at about $6.5 million. We've been talking about that for quite a period of time now. Our property casualty insurance, $300,000. Technology increases of about $1 million. These mostly are related to software contract increases that are based on various CPI factors. I can tell you that FastBridge item we talked about earlier this evening, that in and of itself is a $250,000 increase related to the dyslexia testing. So that is factored into this $1 million increase fixed cost estimate. And then just general high needs enrollment changes, some of the special ed adjustments that occur, we're factoring in about $1 million increase there. So that brings our fixed cost and high need areas that we're anticipating the needs for funding to be $9.5 million. And so if you compare that to our anticipated revenues, we are actually short right now about $250,000, and that's before we consider any sort of wage package. Okay, I'm going to take a breath on that one and know that we are not without some action plans. So we're going to cover a few things that we're working on with the board tonight, and that's essentially what we'll be talking about in the next few months. Certainly, we're going to be looking at all the options that we have at our disposal. We'll be talking with you about revenue options. We've started down the path of alternate financing options. That's part of the reason we brought to the board at the end of February the lease purchase option, to try to spread some of these capital costs over a longer period of time. And then we are also looking at expense reduction options in order to get to a balanced budget for fiscal year 21. So specifically, items that we're looking at, right now we are looking at every position that turns over Those positions are being evaluated to see if that position really needs to be filled or not. This is a good activity to do at any given time, but certainly as we are in a posture where we have had reductions in student enrollment, as positions turn over, as employees retire, that right sizing of staffing, that's going to be a critical component of what we're looking at in order to reduce our expenditure footprint. Again, this isn't going out and making an across-the-board reduction in any form or fashion. This is truly looking at turnover positions that retire, positions that voluntarily quit. And we are very targeted in our approach in that if a school is is full, if they are in an overcapacity position, those are schools we're not looking at. It's those schools that perhaps are underutilized, or the enrollment has caused class sizes to dip to such a low level that we would need to look at a position if a position retires at that school. So that's been a lot of our activity in these past few months, is doing those deeper data dives into where the enrollment changes have actually occurred. So we know as retirements occur, we can make very conscious choices through this process. All programs are being reviewed for possible budget reductions. I have budget staff meeting with all programs. They are doing combination meetings with title so that we can make sure that all the dollars that we're looking at are being evaluated. We are going to review travel expenditures as part of our earlier conversation, not only related to health concerns, but certainly just an overall look at what we spend, and perhaps if there's some ability to look at some reductions in those areas. As part of our energy savings work that we presented to the board with facilities, we are also going to look heavily at our energy footprint to see if, in addition to the construction pieces that would save us energy, if there are energy savings to be had in perhaps some of our habits. So that's kind of a combination of work that will be occurring. That's probably not limited to 1 year, but that really will be a kind of a 3-year initiative for us as we're looking at this investment grade audit and the results of that, and we start to implement some of those kind of that low-hanging fruit reduction of expenditures. Where else can we go to get some of those savings? Again, we're going to look at spreading technology costs over several budget years through a lease purchase option that hopefully will also help with some of the elementary concerns as far as older equipment you heard earlier tonight. So there are kind of a lot of these things are really coming together, and I think that's it's good for the board and the public to understand that we do listen to each other through these various issues that we're having, so that when they're having an issue with software and equipment, we're incorporating that into the budgeting process. So again, that alignment of budget to needs, you can really start to see that through some of this work. We are going to also review some of our virtual programming. Remembering that virtual students actually drive more revenue to the district. We receive $5,000 per student for virtual programming as opposed to the $44.36 base aid on a regular ed student. So it's just an opportunity to perhaps to expand that programming, particularly in light of our new Chief Information Officer being on board and really focusing on digital literacy and those type of things. Is it an opportunity for us to review what we're doing in virtual? Eliminating any sort of redundant programming we have, considering some strategic abandonment of perhaps an initiative that's maybe been in place for a while but isn't actually churning the results that we need. Goes to the superintendent's kind of marching orders to make sure that we are looking at outcomes. So I think that's an area that, again, might not be an immediate turnaround, but as we focus more on data analytics and being able to find those data points that we need to look at as far as what are our initiatives accomplishing? Are we getting the outcomes we want? If we are not, is it time to kind of pack up that program and put it to the side and capture those dollars back in for some of our more important initiatives? The Oracle upgrade that we brought to the board last fall, that's in progress and actually is going very well, and I think we will see some good opportunities for efficiencies through that. Probably not for fiscal year '21, but for fiscal year '22, I think we'll have some items to bring back to the board. We will review our transportation footprint to see if there is possible reductions. Again, probably not for fiscal year '21 as we implement the new contract, but as we start that work, almost immediately following that implementation, we will start to look at ways that we can bring to the board for consideration of reducing that cost. We will review all the revenue options we will be bringing back to the board here in the next few months, including what we can look at on our local option budget, and we will continue to maximize grant and other fundraising opportunities. Our grants department is really doing some phenomenal work. They've had a lot of success since we re-implemented that group, and they continue to seek out opportunities and are bringing in some dollars for the district. So I think that area and some additional fundraising that we're looking at doing, in addition to things like the golf tournament and those initiatives, will continue to help us drive revenue streams into the district, those non-traditional revenue streams. I was very glad to see the board adopt the resolution related to the census because, again, talking about revenue streams, this is one of those areas that our parents really can make a difference for us. We are impacted by federal aid in so many ways. In our current budget, we have $85 million coming to us in federal aid. So literally it's hundreds of millions of dollars for us over the next 10 years that will be impacted by families filling out this questionnaire. And federal dollars hit our Medicaid reimbursements for some of our special needs students. It hits the special ed, the IDEA money, Title I, Title II, Title III, National School Lunch Program, Child Care and Development Grants, Career and Technical Education Grants. There is just a tremendous number of opportunities for federal dollars to come our way, and conversely, if those forms are not filled out, there's a tremendous opportunity for funds to go away. So those are that census information, and I had a couple slides on this, what kind of questions get asked, who should be counted, and then kind of the timeline for the census.
And I'm going to just halt just here to give a shout out to SEIU and UTW. They are partnering with us. We didn't go into any details earlier, but they are partners with us as it relates to the census. And they have been an awesome group to work with, and there's lots of cool things coming on the horizon that we'll visit with you as we move along of what we're doing with the census work, and also getting out and getting our folks registered to vote. And so there's a big campaign there as well in collaboration with UTW and SEIU.
So those notices go out in March, in the middle of March, and then April 1st is the official census day. Paper questionnaires go out in April for those that don't respond online, and then in May through July, there's actually a more boots on the ground for those that haven't responded, and with results going to Congress in December. So again, it's an important piece for all schools. It's certainly important for Wichita Public Schools that families complete the census information. So kind of our continuing steps as we provide more information to the board here in the next few months, we will continue to refine our fixed cost estimate increases based on changing market conditions. We will refine our cost reduction actions and our revenue options, and we will bring those back to the board for consideration. And we will also continue to monitor legislative action. It's been pretty quiet these past couple weeks, but that could change, and some of those could have a negative impact on budget, so we will bring those to you as we know them. So to recap for tonight, actual revenues at the state level through February 2020 are exceeding budget estimates, which is good news since 73% of our Wichita Public Schools funding comes to us through state aid, so the health of the state's budget is critical to the district so that we can meet our obligations. Assuming no negative future legislative action, the district has been able to forecast revenues, we think, pretty accurately for the next 3 years, knowing that the weightings do change year to year, but with that forecast of a 1% decrease, we do anticipate funding being a little bit lower than initially forecasted in February. And right now, we're currently forecasting that anticipated cost estimates, increase estimates, will exceed anticipated revenues, not including a wage package. So we will be bringing back to the board some options for consideration. And as evidenced by the BOE resolution tonight, the census process for 2020 is a critical component of our revenue stream and will impact our federal funding over the next 10 years. So that is a very important part for all of our citizens and stakeholders to take part in. And with that, I'll answer any questions I can.
I just want to reiterate the part that you've actually said twice, but I want to say it a third time. And that is, right now, it's your slide on, I don't know which slide, where the budget shows the new funds compared to the fixed costs. Right now, we're $218,000 in the red.
Correct.
But we're looking at all these things, you know, including having bake sales and other things to be able to raise money, right?
You know, no option is off the table at this point.
Or off the table, right? My real question is, the last time we met, we talked about the weighting and how there was a bill in the Senate, or in the House, to change that weighting factor. Where does that stand now?
The high-density at-risk weighting, is that what we're talking about? Or
Yes,
okay.
yes.
So there are two, kind of a House version, as I understood the last, where we were at the last legislative session. There's a House version that has a sunset that's 5 years out, and there's another that has it at 3 years out. I don't think we're going to get out of having a sunset, but at least there's discussion that we will have the funding going forward into the upcoming year, again, with some strings as far as what we need to do. I think the challenge for us will be, if we didn't know there was a sunset before because it was kind of slid in at the last minute, how do we plan when we know there's a sunset and it's a $15 million item for us? So do we start to carve out so much from the budget so that we're not faced with a $15 million cut in 5 years? I think that it presents us some interesting challenges as far as planning, you know, these next 5 years, however long the sunset is, knowing there's a sunset. Or do we wait and we just fight it out at the time that it ends, and we go back and we argue our point that removing $15 million, we're not getting rid of our high at-risk student needs. So you're not helping us by cutting $15 million out of our budget to meet those needs. But nothing has passed at this point.
And I'm going to also just jump in here again. I'm giving lots of shout outs, but there was a group of teachers that actually traveled to Topeka the last week, or I think it was last week or so, and they were very strong advocates for this particular bill, and that's the only reason why I'm interjecting here. And so if they're up with insomnia, again, I would like to give another shout out to those teachers for representing us with dignity, grace, and style, and they were phenomenal, and they represented us well.
Ernestine?
What's the amount that the state spends per pupil? I mean, I know, not just for us, but do you know what that is?
The overall state amount is between $13,000 and $14,000 per student, all funding sources all throughout the system. So different districts are going to have different levels depending on how much aid versus how much local tax effort. But we're at between $13,000 and $14,000 per student.
13 and 14,000. In this state, the states and all funding per inmate is $24,000 to house an inmate. I think it's time we started putting our money where our values are with our kids. Thank you.
Well, I have no other questions after that, so thank you
All right,
very
thank
much.
you.